Peace be upon you. God willing, today we're going to read from chapter 18 regarding Moses and the teacher. Some really good lessons in here, inshallah. We can pull from it and learn from it. So let's start. Before we start reading, we always say we seek refuge in God from saying the rejected. So 1860, the header reads, Valuable Lessons from Moses and his teacher. Moses said to his servant, I will not rest until I reach the point where the two rivers meet, no matter how long it takes. When they reached the point where they met, they forgot their fish, and it found its way back to the river sneakily. After they passed the point, he said to his servant, Let us have lunch. All this traveling has thoroughly exhausted us. He said, Remember when we sat by the rock back there? I paid no attention to the fish, and it was the devil that made me forget it, and it found its way back to the river strangely. Moses said, That was the place we were looking for. They traced their steps back. They found one of our servants whom we blessed with mercy and bestowed upon him from our own knowledge. 1866. Moses said to him, Can I follow you that you may teach me some of the knowledge and guidance bestowed upon you? He said, You cannot stand to be with me. How can you stand that which you do not comprehend? He said, You will find me, God willing, patient. I will not disobey any command you give me. He said, If you follow me, then you shall not ask me about anything unless I choose to tell you about it. 1871. So they went. When they bored a ship, he bored a hole in it. He said, Did you bore a hole in it to drown its people? You have committed something terrible. He said, Did I not say that you cannot stand to be with me? Moses said, I am sorry. Do not punish me for my forgetfulness. Do not be too harsh with me. So they went. When they met a young boy, he killed him. He said, Why did you kill such an innocent person who did not kill another person? You have committed something horrendous. He said, Did I not tell you, you cannot stand to be with me? He said, If I ask you about anything else, then do not keep me with you. You have seen enough apologies from me. So they went. When they reached a certain community, they asked the people for food, but they refused to host them. Soon they found the wall about to collapse, and they fixed it. He said, You have demanded a wage for that. Oh, apologies. It says, You could have demanded a wage for that. 1878. Header reads, There's a good reason for everything. He said, Now we have to part company, but I will explain to you everything you cannot stand. As for the ship, it belonged to a poor fisherman, and I wanted to render it defective. There was a king coming after them, who was confiscating every ship forcibly. As for the boy, his parents were good believers. We saw that he was going to burden them with his transgression and disbelief. We willed that your Lord substitute in his place another son, one who is better in righteousness and kindness. As for the wall, it belonged to two orphan boys in the city. Under it there was a treasure that belonged to them. Because their father was a righteous man, your Lord wanted them to grow up and attain full strength, then extract their treasure. Such is the mercy from your Lord. I did none of that on my own volition. This is the explanation of the things you cannot stand. Wow, so many good verses and so many good lessons that God willing we can pull from this. So let's just take a moment and see kind of what the circumstance is. Moses was seeking a teacher, and God provided him with one. And when Moses was going through his curriculum, he came to the realization that a lot of what was happening he couldn't comprehend and he couldn't stand. Even though he told himself, he confirmed it, that he's going to basically be able to be patient, to not try to jump to conclusions. 3 times in 3 different events, he reverts and slips up and questions what's going on. And it's pretty interesting when you look at the 3 events. In the first event, the teacher goes and he bores a hole in his ship. And when he does this, Moses' initial response is, this seems like a reckless act. Like, why would you do that? And he didn't understand the implications. And the teacher at the end of the story kind of explains. And what he says, look, there was a king coming and confiscating all these ships, and I had to render the ship defective because this fisherman was a good believer and deserved to have his ship. And if you think about it from the fisherman's standpoint, when he sees the event, how did the fisherman behave? Because you think about it, he's a poor fisherman, he has one vessel, and he finds that someone would bore a hole in a ship. Now, the average person, when they see an event like this, they'll start cursing and questioning God's absolute authority and wondering why did this happen. But a submitter in this circumstance should be steadfast, should realize that God is in absolute complete control and that there's a good reason for everything. And what's profound about this is that the time from which the individual bore a hole in the ship to when the king came and confiscated it, now we don't know exactly how long that was, but there was a definitive time that individual is going to come and realize that this was a blessing in disguise, that there was a good reason this happened, and allow him to grow his faith in his trust in God. In the third incident, we have that there was a treasure buried underneath a wall, and the individual goes and he patches up the wall. And Moses' response is, "Oh, you could have, demanded a wage for that. Why did you do that for free?" In essence, especially when the people of the town didn't treat them nicely. And again, he fell short-sighted as far as the motivations behind why this individual was doing these acts. And he explains to Moses, he says at the end of the story that the reason he did this, there was a treasure underneath this wall. If the wall crumbles early, then the individuals, the children who basically own that treasure, aren't going to be able to claim it. So it needed to stay sturdy for long enough that they're of age, that when the wall crumbles, they can claim their treasure. Now, you put yourself in the sense of the children's standpoint. And the children in this time, they have no clue that there's even a treasure, yet alone a wall that's keeping their treasure away from them for the time being. And maybe when they're older, they can reflect and be like, wow, how profound that, the wall crumbles and we basically find this treasure that belongs to us when we're of an age that we can claim it. Imagine if it happened too early or too late. They could have never have got access to their treasure. And again, it goes to show the absolute awesomeness of God's timing. Now, you also think of the parents of those two boys. It said the father died, and he left them this treasure that was basically buried underneath this wall. And you think about this, that God is taking care of this individual's kin, even when he's long gone, right? That even though he left his treasure for him, God is the one who's basically bestowing this treasure onto these children because their father was a righteous man. And again, this is something that it might have, probably took years for them to even be able to understand that God was planning for this, yet alone be appreciative of that entire event. Now, this takes us to the second event. And this event is probably the most controversial, the most kind of like profound, is that they see a young boy and he takes his life. Now, this individual, most likely is probably an angel. I mean, an average human being wouldn't be doing stuff like this. Angels take lives every day. That's what they do. But you think about this as far as the parents of that child, that boy. They just lost their child. And the teacher's explaining that there was a good reason for this, that child was basically going to burden his parents with a transgression and disbelief, and that God willed to substitute a better child in his place. Now, these parents, they will never know for sure why they lost their child. The only thing that they know for sure is that it happened for a good reason. Because if they believe in God, if they trust in God, they realize that everything happens under God's watch and by God's leave. Now, it's going to be hard for some individuals to basically bear that, and that's kind of understood. But you have to think about this. The messenger gives the footnote in that verse in 1880 regarding, taking the life of a child. It says, Adolf Hitler was a cute and seemingly innocent child. Had he died as a child, many would have grieved and many would have even questioned God's wisdom. We learn from these profound lessons that there's a good reason behind everything. Now, some people might ask, well, why did these parents even have this child if they were only going to lose it? And again, this is part of God's absolute system, is that God sees everything, every atom, every detail. We have no clue what implications that child had for that brief interim of time that he was here. And again, it's serving to expose certain individuals who question God's absolute authority, that they, as opposed to coming to the consensus that, hey, we won't understand this in this life, and we have to just trust in God, to why these events take place. People automatically jump to conclusions that, oh, God is unjust, God is in absolute control, and make all these, false accusations towards God and, the purpose of this life. And it's events like these that, in essence, it distinguishes those who truly believe and trust in God wholeheartedly versus those who are doubtful, disbelievers, hypocrites. And it's very profound because you think about it, it's like this is an act, in all three of these events, an act took place that if you looked at it at just that cross-section without taking the grander picture in mind, you would have wondered, just like Moses, why would this be allowed to happen? Why would, this poor fisherman, why would God allow someone to bore a hole into his ship and lose his one source of income? And what they miss is the bigger picture. And that's what God sees. God sees the grander design of this whole. God sees what the outcome is, not just 10 minutes, but 10 years, all the way from now to after your life, if you take in consideration the two boys who had the treasure. God was looking forward in time from the father, that when he was to pass, that his children were still going to be taken care of. And this is a glimpse of just how absolutely awesome God is and how absolutely awesome God's power is. Now, there's another takeaway from this, is that we see this in the example of Moses' servant when they lost the fish. He made the comment that, basically the fish was lost at a certain point in the river. They move ahead, and then they come to the realization that, he forgot the fish. And the excuse that he came up with when this happened, he says, it was the devil that made me forget it. And it found its way back to the river strangely. Now, what's interesting about this is that, let's say it was the devil that made him forget it, but it was still in God's absolute control. Meaning that God wanted them to go back to that point, to meet the teacher, to go through this whole lesson plan. And if it wasn't for the sake that he forgot about that fish, they would have never gotten back to that point. And this is very similar to the previous podcast in regard to the coyote and the roadrunner, is that, the devil schemes, but to God belongs the ultimate scheming. That God is already planned for even the schemes of the devil. That God has already planned, numerous steps ahead. And irrespective if the devil comes and inflicts some sort of hardship or adversity, that if we have absolute trust in God and we basically are patient to follow things through, that we will see the reasons behind these events. Now, some of these events, obviously, we're not going to see in this life, but it's going to be revealed to us on the day of judgment. In 50:22, it reads, "You used to be oblivious to this. We now removed your veil. Today, your vision is as strong as steel." And God talks about the individuals getting their record, right? And it says nothing small is left out of this record, meaning that everything that occurs in our life, every reason, every question we possibly have is going to be explained to us. You think about all these events that happen in our life that we don't understand, why would it happen? Why did I get a flat tire? Or why did I, not pass that exam? Or whatever it may be. That if we have absolute trust in God, that we realize that there is a good reason for it. And it takes us to another point is, Moses, he was a messenger of God. He's described as honorable, strong, good believer. And he asked God for a teacher, and a teacher was given to him. And we read in the Quran in chapter 18, verse 17, that actually having a teacher is a prerequisite. Pull up the verse. 18:17 says, "A guiding teacher is a prerequisite." You could see the sun when it rose coming from the right side or of the cave when it set, and it shone on them from the left side as they slept in the hollow thereof. This is one of God's portents. Whomever God guides is truly guided one. Whomever he sends astray, you will not find for him a guiding teacher. Now, this is regarding the children of the cave. God willing, we can talk about that another time. But this statement, whomever God guides is truly guided one, and whomever he sends astray, you will not find for him a guiding teacher. And the header again says a guiding teacher, a prerequisite. So 13:33 says, "Is there any equal to the one who controls every single soul? Yet they set up idols to rival God, saying, 'Name them. Are you informing him of something on earth that he does not know? Or are you fabricating empty statements? Indeed, the schemes of those who disbelieve have been adorned in their eyes. They are thus diverted from the right path. Whomever God sends astray can never find a guiding teacher.'" So, just like Moses, every single believer, all of us, we need a guiding teacher. And God is described as the teacher. That's one of his names, is the teacher of the Quran. That's 55:2. It says teacher of the Quran. And God communicates to the human beings by three mechanisms. And it's in 42:51. It reads, "No human being can communicate with God except 1, through inspiration, 2, from behind a barrier, or 3, by sending a messenger through whom he reveals what he wills. He is most high, most wise." Now, these are three mechanisms that God communicates to us. God teaches us through inspiration, from behind a barrier, kind of like how God talked to Moses, or by sending a messenger. And the messenger for us, obviously we have the examples in the Quran of the messengers that came and their history, and we can learn from this. But there's another way that God teaches us. God teaches us through every single interaction, every single encounter, every single thing that we hear, we see. There's a lesson for us because we have to understand that God has curated every single event in our lives. And in 1866 through 70, it says, Moses said to him, to his teacher, "Can I follow you that you may teach me some of the knowledge and the guidance bestowed upon you?" He said, "You cannot stand to be with me. How can you stand with that which you do not comprehend?" Moses said, "You will find me, God willing, patient. I will not disobey any command you've given me." He said, "If you follow me, then you shall not ask about anything unless I choose to tell you about it." In life, every single event that happens to our life, God has curated, God has dictated for us to be able to learn from. Now, us, just like Moses, we make the statement that, we will not disobey any command that God gives to us. Yet, in every single interaction in our life, a lot of us, we're guilty of, we complain, we question God, we wonder, why did it happen this way? Why didn't it happen the way that we envision? And you realize that so much of unhappiness is that when life doesn't meet our expectations. But it's not that we should put trust in our expectations. We should put trust, absolute trust, into God. Every day in our life, God is giving us lessons. And we can either choose to pay attention, to learn, to be patient and follow things through, or we can be kind of like the kid in the back of the classroom who's falling asleep, not paying attention to anything as the lesson plan is going. Or worse off, the kid who's basically not only sleeping, but complaining the entire time. You think about this, the parents that we have. God is the one who selected them. The teachers that we have growing up in school, God is the one who put them there. The bosses we have at work, God is the one who promoted them to put them into that position. Our children, God dictated which souls, which personalities are going to be given to each of our children. Even the traffic that we sit in, or the field of study that we're in, or the university we go to, God has perfectly designed all this for us to learn from. Now, a lot of times it's tempting, in essence, to complain, to regret, to think, oh, if it was only different, if only it happened this way. Now, as long as our faith is 100% devoted to God, we have to be at the utmost certainty that God has our best interest in mind. And, get to a point that when these events take place in our life, things that don't make sense, things that aren't apparent, that we have that trust in God and we realize that there's a good reason for it. Let's say you go in for a job interview and it's a job that you think that you totally want and you're so psyched to get it, and you go in for the interview and you completely blow it. Or let's say you didn't blow it, you did your absolute best and you thought you were phenomenal, but irrespective, you don't get the job. Now, a believer has to trust that this was meant to be, that God did not want that person to have this job at this time in this place. Maybe at another time, maybe in a different organization, but it wasn't meant to be. Now, God can choose to basically show that individual that there's a better job in store for them, or he may choose to never show them. But irrespective, we have to have our absolute trust in God and realize that if we are on the path, if we're doing our contact prayer, we're giving our zakat, we're trying our best to be as righteous as we can, that anything that happens in our life, that we submit 100% and we submit cheerfully, because we realize that, hey, if we come to our ship and there's a hole in it, there's a good reason for it. If something happens that we don't get that promotion we want, there's a good reason for it. And we have to trust in God and be absolutely happy and joyful. If we have a teacher that we don't say jive with, or a boss that we think isn't managing properly, we have to realize that God is trying to teach us a lesson. God is trying to explain something to us. And if we submit, and if we trust in God, and if we listen, we open our ears, we open our hearts, God is going to either A, take us out of that situation, but B, teach us something that we would never be able to learn on our own. And God can teach us lessons through any means necessary. It could be through traffic, at the grocery store, flipping through, channels, or on YouTube, or talking with a friend. There's a lesson for us. And if we can just sit back and reflect and trust in God, God may show it to us. And if he does, it's basically a way for us to show our appreciation. And this all takes us back to a common theme that's throughout this Quran. It's the theme of being a submitter, is knowing that God is doing absolutely everything. And one of my favorite verses is 1061. It's knowing God. We read this, I'm sure, numerous podcasts, but it never gets old. It says, "You do not get into any situation, nor do you recite any Quran, nor do you do anything without us being witnesses thereof as you do it. Not even an atom's weight is out of your Lord's control, be it in the heavens or earth, nor is there anything smaller than an atom or larger that is not recorded in a profound record." 4:126, "To God belongs everything in the heavens and the earth. God is in full control of all things. Those who submit," 31:22 says, "Those who submit completely to God while leading a righteous life had gotten hold of the strongest bond, for God is in full control of all things." 39:62, "God is the creator of all things. He's in full control of all things." So next time, tomorrow, today, whatever, something happens in your life that doesn't make sense, have that trust in God, have that confidence in God, and realize that this is meant for our good, that God has a good reason for everything. And if we just, basically open our hearts, that God will give us that contentment, God will provide us that peace of mind, and knowing that irrespective if we see the end outcome, if God chooses to show it to us or not, that we'll cheerfully submit and we'll never be disappointed. Until next time, peace and God bless.